Hey, Chris, good morning. How you doing?
Hi, Ron. Great. How are you today?
Great. So today we're going to finish up our three-part series on the tips and tricks to grow your marketplace. So if you remember in part one, if you missed it, we covered marketing strategies, hyperautomation, and enabling self-service. Part two, we covered deep learning, personalization, went into a lot there. And today we're going to cover Web3, the different technologies, security, performance, and now that we have all the data, how do we turn that data into BI and business intelligence to make good business decision and grow the company? So to get started, I'm definitely, and not even slightly, I'm going to play the layman today, and you're going to be the technologist, right? So when we start talking about technology over the next few years, we're still today in the era of Web 2, right? They started really talking. I think the term Web3 was coined back in 2014. It's been around that long and we still haven't implemented it, right? We've implemented parts of Web3, really when it comes to blockchain and you're talking about cryptocurrency. Those are really the two uses today of Web3 technologies. But I think when we start talking about Web3 and how it affects us, developers, consumers of marketplaces, which is specifically what we're talking about today, we're kind of wondering, how does Web3 play? Does it disrupt us? Does it help us? I really don't know the answer to that. So before we go on, I know Web3 is kind of an era of technology, right? I want you to go ahead and dive in and talk about your definition of what you think Web3 is and some of the technologies that it is, and kind of educate the audience a little bit, layman like myself, on what really is Web3 and what do we have to look forward to, or what do we have to be scared of?
Yeah, good question. I think in general, a lot of people agree that Web3 is essentially this concept of decentralizing information. So if you think about it in general, a lot of businesses or organizations, they don't necessarily have to be businesses, um, but they tend to have a lot of our data. And so there's sort of this, progression with Web3 to essentially not having to give organizations, our data. Um, of course, probably one of the most prominent things is being able to go to a site and make a purchase. So just to use an example, in theory, with the right Web3 implementation, not only do we get to take advantage of tokenization and anonymity, where it would make sense. Um, like, I'm not going to give you my credit card information. I'm not going to give you my payment information. I'm going to transfer some tokens to you that represent, essentially it's like a currency. And I'm going to use that to make my purchase. And I'm doing it in a zero trust environment. So I don't literally have to trust your stuff. And you're going to also verify that I'm a real person, if you will, but it's done through this decentralized method. So instead of the company verifying me and processing my payment, it's essentially done in this decentralized, tokenized manner. Um, this is a really powerful concept because if you think about it, like there's a lot of promise to that. If I don't have to put my payment information into every site that I go to, it makes it a lot easier to purchase on different websites. That's a really powerful thing because a lot of the reason that many people purchase almost exclusively from one vendor in the US, for example, Amazon, is because it's really hard to know that you're going to get the same quality of service and support from all the other independent vendors from their smaller websites. It's hard to know that the process for checking out is going to be as easy and streamlined. So a lot of times what happens for Amazon, and I'm not saying that this is their business model, I'm just saying this tends to be what happens, is there's markup in Amazon's price, and sometimes it's pretty extreme, and the consumer doesn't really recognize that because they essentially have a form of monopoly that's not a technical monopoly, but they have that user's information. They have their sort of ease of use monopolized, if you will. And that's great. I mean, that's their prerogative, right? But Web3 can help to sort of decentralize all of that information and decentralize all of that convenience to make it sort of transportable to any site. That's a lot of the promise of Web3, and it extends beyond that. Imagine if you're working with, a particular organization where you're having to put in a lot of information. Well, you could just provide essentially this tokenized type of interaction with the organization, and you wouldn't have to provide the same information over and over and over again. There's a lot around security that could be done here with not having to share PHI or PII until it's absolutely needed, and the list goes on. So the idea in general is that we're going to be leveraging technology that's available. And it really just boils down to essentially security technology to make it so that information is immutable. In other words, it can't be changed by someone else without it being detected that it's been changed. And so this makes it so that we can move some of the centralization of data from individual organizations over to basically non. There are different terms for this, but one is a decentralized autonomous organization, which is basically like a group of these sort of interactions that are occurring, but it's not managed by an individual company. It's managed by a group that's biased toward keeping your information decentralized and anonymous, if that's part of the approach, etc. So, did that help to give a high level? Hopefully, it's not too much detail there.
Yeah, I mean it's exciting and convenient. It's also a little scary, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like Wikipedia, right? I mean, there's more information because everybody that has viable information can kind of add to it. But then the problem is if there's no central organization controlling or regulating, I think that's kind of one of the promises of why a lot of people still use banks instead of going to credit unions, right? Is because the bank federally insures, and there's a governing regulation that regulates. The government comes in and says, this is what you can and can't do with people's money. This is how much money you have to keep on hand. So if there's a run on the bank, things like that, right? There's somebody guiding that. So I think for a lot of us, at least people like me, when we think about that, we understand, but we also are, because we don't fully understand the technology, we hear about people forgetting their password to their crypto account and their money's gone forever and there's no way to retrieve it, right? It's permanently written and it's permanently etched and nobody can go in and touch it. And it's so secure that once they forget their password, their money's gone forever. And you hear that. Now, I don't know how true that is. It might be, but I think that, I'm guessing that that's why Web3 is taking so long, because
Yep.
really when you decentralize and hand this off to this autonomous organization, if you will, or this collective, right, this technology collective, you got to make sure you do it right. And you got to make sure you don't hand over the keys to the kingdom and we lose
Right.
everything and lose control of everything, right? So my guess is that's probably why Web3 is taking so long, is there are so many different security considerations that need to be taken into account. But, today, I mean, I love the fact that, my credit card's tokenized. I still have to put in the number, which is kind of what we're saying now, is we're kind of saying my digital wallet now moves into the ether sphere. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like PayPal, but a little bit different, where since I've got my PayPal account, now I can go to any internet website and I want to pay, if they accept PayPal, of course, right? But
Right.
if they do, then I can say, oh, here, take this from my PayPal account. I stick my thumbprint on it and it says great. And it takes the money out of my PayPal account, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, is having this
Yes.
digital
Yeah.
capability. Go
I
ahead.
would just add that, just to your point, that it's been slow. There's been very slow adoption and almost reverse adoption in a lot of cases, where a lot of folks were clamoring to adopt this technology 3 to 5 years ago,
Right.
whereas there's really sort of a regression there on the currency side of things. One of the things that I think is really interesting, though, about Web3 is it's not just about payments and it's not just about, digital currency,
Right.
although that is one of the offshoots of it. I think a lot of the power, just like with AI, is finding a particular niche. AI, if we were to have said, and I guess some people said this, but AI is going to take over for people, driving like really expensive and like risky routes, like with school buses with little kids walking in front of them all day long. Like that's probably not the best place to start with AI taking over.
Right.
Um, it's probably best to start with AI like iteratively moving into generative content for marketing, where someone's looking at it and giving it feedback. Well, that's where AI has a great adoption. It's similar for Web3, where yes, probably a sort of like billboard size, focus has been around the currency side of things. A small little tiny, notebook paper compared to that is some of the more practical, like immediate use cases where we can augment what we're doing instead of replacing what we're doing with Web3. And I think
Right.
that's really the important distinction is how can we leverage this technology to augment and support what we're doing, such that we can take advantage of the technology where it is now. And there is a part of this that's sort of a network effect where until enough people adopt a token or a currency, essentially, then it doesn't have enough momentum to be self-supporting, right? So, but the idea of blockchain, where something is immutable, in other words, like it every single time you make a change with blockchain, you're basically hashing the whole set of data. And so you're storing that. And if there was a change that someone made, it would be detected with the blockchain technology. So this could be really helpful for making sure that we keep really detailed transaction logs and referencing those. This could also be really helpful for security. And it's really helpful for sort of maintaining my information and not necessarily having to give it over to someone, but letting them know that it is available. Like I pass a certain form of authentication or authorization, but I don't have to give my information over. And so those are some of the really powerful aspects of Web3 that are really interesting. I think the PayPal example that you used was a great example. But I'm sort of thinking of it as like single sign-on, maybe giving someone a notification that I have access to this with this token, but I have to prove that I'm authorized to use this token. Like I am Ron Halverson or I am Chris Reddick, and this is my token. And so there's just some really interesting specific things that can help reduce some of the overhead. Um, but it's also relatively impractical in some areas due to the network effect. So that's
Right.
really our goal is to sort of help you unpack that for your business that's really having to figure this out and operate in the real world, not the fantasy world of what will become possibly if it works, right?
Okay, so two quick things to what Chris just said that I found really helpful. One is the slow adoption. Second is going to be blockchain, so don't let me forget that. But the slow adoption, for example, right now, everybody knows what Chat GPT is, right? We're using AI every single day. I mean, I use it for SEO. I still have control though, and I'm comfortable with that because, like Chris said, I have the capability to use it, review it's done, and then decide whether or not I want to accept those results or whether I want to go back. And I don't. I mean, 90% of the time, Chat GPT doesn't give me what I want the first time. It just is not there yet. And so one of the things we talk about AI is training AI, right? I think we talked about it last time when in part two, we talked about leveraging deep learning, right? We talked about what is training AI. We still have a lot of training AI to do so that the results are more predictable and exactly what we're looking for, right? Again, remember, AI is just kind of a dumb powerhouse of all these workers. If we don't feed it the right information, those workers aren't going to know what to do or what to produce, right? So adoption is going to be slow, very similar to like if I had a football team and none of them have ever played football, it's going to be very slow before they're national champions and can win every game, right? Which is what we're looking for with AI. We have to train it. We have to get all of those components in there and all that information programmed so it can do exactly what we want. So the slow adoption thing, I totally agree. The blockchain concept, sometimes people don't understand that. And they're worried about the security. The way I like to look at it is I bank with Chase, right? And I've been with Chase for, I don't know, 25 years. It's easy for me to go into Chase and I can see every single transaction that has ever happened to my account. If I took $10 out last week, I can go in and see that. If I go in and put $1,000 in today and 3 months from now, and I go, look, I can go back and see that Ron took $10 out on such and such a date. And then on such a date, he put $1,000 in there. It's not just like Ron goes in and edits his account and says, instead of $3,200, I now have $4,200, right? And that's what blockchain is. Blockchain doesn't allow editing. And that's where a lot of the security is, right? And Chris mentioned that when something gets written to the blockchain, there's a notification. It can detect that, right? So every single transaction is recorded to the blockchain. And it's very similar to my bank account. That's the easiest way for me to understand blockchain, right? Nobody messes with my account. Nobody goes into Ron's account and says, okay, today I'm going to edit. If I go give the bank $1,000 and deposit it, they don't go in and edit my balance from 2,200 to 3,200, right? They go in and put a separate transaction to the blockchain, my account, that says on such and such a date, this teller, Ron Halverson in person went into the bank, handed them $1,000 in cash or wrote a check. 5 days later, the check cleared. All of those things are physically recorded. And that's really where the blockchain starts adding some of that security, is every single thing. So as Chris was kind of alluding to there, if someone goes in and tries to quote unquote edit or hack or do something, everything is transacted and written permanently to the blockchain. And so there is a very detailed and articulate log, transaction log of everything that's happened to whatever said asset that's being recorded, all of the information about that asset, like whether that's an NFT, whether that's a piece of digital art, whether that's crypto, whatever it is, all the information about that item is being recorded to the blockchain. Did you want to add to that, Chris? Sometimes for layman's terms, I use concepts to understand that, to try to help understand, right?
Yeah. And I would say, like, putting it into really pragmatic terms for business, which is really what I hear you hitting on, it sort of boils down to what you just said. It's going to manage, like, the concept behind the blockchain is a mechanical construct where we are, by the way that it's made, independent of the organization that's running it. The mechanics of it are such that everything that's sort of done, it's permanently etched into its memory. And the way I like to think of it is like giving someone a truth serum. And it's kind of like that, because a lot of organizations that manage data, they might choose to represent data or like leave certain data out, or they may have something happen. That's sort of like the reason, among other reasons, to have this Web3 technology is there's some suspicion about the organization, perfectly handling the data.
Right.
So this construct of blockchain came around, and the idea is really powerful because no matter who's managing it, it's sort of self-reporting. Every time you put something into it, it changes the sort of thumbprint, and it's literally using a hash is what it's called. And all it's doing is it's looking at all of the past data and this new piece of data, and it's essentially representing that in code or in data. And it's doing it in a way that is virtually impossible to recreate, especially when you sort of like stack all the data. And so you end up with this set of information that if anyone messed with it in any way, shape, or form, you would immediately know. And so that makes it really helpful for like medical records, possibly, or dealing with signatures, like who signed what when. And this is really practical. Like we can use that right away. So that might actually be really helpful as an NFT to say these two parties signed this. Now it's a legal representation of this that is digital that we can use. And there are certain technologies that are already proven for this that are in use, but these are just some examples of how you might use it practically. We see it used a lot for inventory management, for, again, financial transactions, but maybe not necessarily like using a token for the currency, but using blockchain to sort of persist the transaction history. So these are some really practical ways that you can use Web3 right away. And again, the other aspect that we see a lot of is around security, and sort of like a zero trust environment, and leveraging this ability to sort of decentralize around the security parts of it. So we'll of course keep you apprised as we see, really specific examples in the real world that are in use with, the currency side of it. But generally speaking, that's a slower to adopt aspect of what doesn't mean it's not being used in certain niches. It's just relatively slower because, just like AI, it's a very challenging set of circumstances that the currency has to overcome. You're not going to put a currency in that's fluctuating all the time in value, like a lot of the blockchain, tokens are, and that's just the reality. So, but it can be used in a very practical sense right away for certain parts of your business to augment your business.
Yeah, that sounds good. So very similar to how some of us added in the acceptance of PayPal on there, right? I mean, that's basically what we've done, but it's going to be much more secure, right? Because, for example, if PayPal went and decided to steal the money and go off and go to a non-extradition country, that's what Chris is talking about in this trust environment, right? My money will no longer be sitting in Chase, where a Chase manager could go in and take some money and digitally alter the records. It'll actually be out on the blockchain, and Chase might be the company representing my money, or that I might be paying or depositing money to buy a CD or invest or get a mortgage or something like that. But my actual money, my actual account, my actual balance and everything's going to be etched on the blockchain and non-touchable by anybody.
And Ron, just to hit on another topic here with marketplace, sorry to interrupt. A really specific example of this might be with a marketplace with items that are in the marketplace that possibly you're going through some verification process or certification of the authenticity of antiques. Or maybe there's a process for bidding on real estate remotely, and there has to be a contract signed that, hey, I'm going to put this deposit out there for $5,000 before I bid on this real estate remotely. Or maybe it's a jewelry or a rare item like a collectible automobile. These are examples where using Web3 can be really, really helpful because we can track in this immutable way. Think like we can't be modified. The history of these items, who's touched them, who's had them, where did they source from? What was the transaction history between the buyer and seller? It could even be used to deal with like interaction with their chat. Like if we want to tell them and disclose that, hey, this is going to be recorded, that how y'all are interacting and what commitments you're making. There are all kinds of uses in a marketplace where having this sort of immutable or unchangeable data set could be really helpful to your marketplace in a really immediate way as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I'm remotely bidding on a, $200,000 piece of art, if I could go in and see concrete proof that I know that it's the real item, and I can see the 17 times it was sold before and who owned it and what they paid and when they paid, and see the value go up, I mean, that certainly gives me a lot more information about that item, right? So yeah, that concrete proof. And it's kind of weird because Chris has used that term zero trust. And so that sounds like a negative thing, but it's a really positive thing, right? It's basically, I don't have to trust anybody. Like right now, if I go online, I have to trust that Amazon is not going to steal from me when I go in and put my credit card and give them my credit card data, that they're not going to go sell my data to these marketing companies, right? Which others have. I'd name one, but I'm not going to do that. So it just happened to me. I literally get 50 new emails a day. I just bought something from a very reputable international organization, and they sold my information, and now I'm getting inundated with spam, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've talked about the performance. We've talked about the marketplace. We've talked about Web3 and how we hope it's going to change the world over the next few years, right? And how ChatGPT and AI and some of the things that we're doing today are Web3 technologies that we already are dipping our toes in, and affects all of us, whether we know it or not. So now let's pretend that we have all this data. Now here we are, we're the marketplace owners, right? What do we do with that data with regards to BI, i.e., how do we convert all of this data that we're now gathering, whether it's immutable or not, right? Some of the data may not be. We may not write to the blockchain everybody that ever browses our website, but that might be something as a marketer that Chris and I are like, we have this marketplace, we have thousands of people visiting, we only have 100 a day buying. What's happening to the other 990 people or the other 900? Let's say we have 1,000 people a day and 100 are buying. We have a really good conversion rate. That's 10%, really high, right? So 10% of the people that come to the website buy. Well, a heck of a lot more people are coming to the website and not buying. The information about them is usually more important to me as the marketer, right? The information about the 100 is really important to sales because they're the ones trying to convert and report on the sales. But to the marketer, the information that's more important is what the heck did the 900 do? What did they go? What did they browse? What did they put in the cart and remove or abandon? Or, what are they browsing and not doing? How much time are they spending? Are they looking at any of the videos? Are they looking at all the white papers we've written? Are they using the search? What terms are they searching for? That kind of information is liquid gold for us marketers. So, Chris, I want you to talk about two things, if you would, please. The first one would be the marketplace technology and its ability to capture this kind of information, right? Like our platform, we can go in and add these analytics tools that can literally track everything about every visitor and what they do and where they go and how much time they spend. Talk about how we can capture that data, what we can capture, and then let's talk about how we convert that then into BI, right? Intelligent data that you and I can now make business decisions on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to say that I think that the way that you outlined that was excellent because ultimately everything that we're doing with the marketplace software is in service of the customer and the sellers in the marketplace, and then of course the underlying business behind the marketplace itself, and that's who we're serving, right? And and so like what those folks all need is for it to work really, really well. And for it to be as smart as it can and intuitive as it can. And so, of course, what you just said is perfect. People know that we can get this information, and I'll kind of talk about how we get it in just a moment. But like, they know we can get this information, and it's sort of a minimum requirement to exist and sort of take a top spot in a marketplace niche. Not to mention, a very dominant marketplace overall is learning from the indirect data that a user, whether it's a buyer or seller, or even an administrative user, that they're giving us with their interaction with the site. Of course, right. We can also give them direct ways to interact, but that should be sort of the exception. And it should just be a really heavy weighting whenever we get that direct interaction. But generally speaking, we are using analytics tools that are tracking it, and this is sort of determined by the owner of the marketplace and by the users opting into this, and having, clear information and disclosure that this is what they're opting into. But we can literally track just about everything. And one of the biggest things that we want to sort of understand is what's the behavior on the site and what does that mean? And how can we make it a better experience for the user? So that ends up unpacking into a lot of things, but the physical mechanism ends up being typically JavaScript that's sitting there sort of watching what's going on, but de-identifying the data, any sensitive data, any sort of secure data. We don't want to carry that with us in this tracking and analytics. We want to sort of separate out sensitive information that we're really just not, we don't really need that for our analytics anyway. And we certainly don't want to sort of impede on anyone's security or privacy. And so ultimately we're sort of removing some of the sensitivity, getting at this sort of aggregation of data, but being able to drill down on an individual level. So it's a matter of like collecting everything that's happening on the site. This includes things that folks may not be aware of, but like their operating system and their browser and their screen dimensions and information about where they're physically located, at least as far as their VPN tells us if they're using a VPN,
Sure.
And what their browsing history is, and of course we try to get a thumbprint of that person. So Typically, this can be helpful for other reasons as well, like leveraging the analytics to look at security footprint. But ultimately, we're going to see who all the users are that are on the site. We're typically going to be able to get at information like what they're searching, what the results are, and what their behavior is. And then we're going to be able to marry those together. So all of the reports that you talked about earlier, I think are dead on as far as, what the output will be. But one of the things that I'll point out is there are a lot of third-party resources that will sort of do parts of this. One of the things that we've found over the years is that having a bare metal or sort of like software that we control, we can give our clients everything that they need. And this tends to be really, really helpful, especially as you're scaling your business. So we really believe strongly in not just like tacking on tools that sort of do half of the job, but they don't really interoperate well. In other words, they don't share the data with each other properly. And so we can sort of do that through all of that through our marketplace, and either feed these systems so you can leverage these third-party tools with us feeding it the data from a centralized location. Like, what is everyone doing? How are they behaving? And then we're going to push that data up to like a business intelligence platform. Or you can directly leverage the marketplace itself to get at that data. So curious if you have any other thoughts on that, Ron. If I answered some of the questions or maybe you want to elaborate, would be great.
Yeah, no, I love it. And yeah, those are great discussions there. So now that we've got, and so one of the things Chris is alluding to there is that instead of just tacking on a bunch of third-party tools and trying to glue it together, a significant amount of all of this data collection, analytics, reporting capability, data analysis, deep learning, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, all of those things are actually core in our Clarity marketplace platform. And so one of the things he's talking about in this bare metal is when you're looking for a marketplace technology, ensure that the bare metal, if you will, the software platform has some of this natively built into the platform, right? You don't want to look for something that's going to cost you, let's start making up numbers, 50 grand. And then you've got 17 different tools, each with their own costs that you have to plug in to extend and give you all the capability, and then worry about the interoperability and the updating. When any one of those plugins updates, it breaks the JavaScript for another one of the modules that plugs in. We see that all the time, right? Matter of fact, I've been here 11 and a half years. I've only seen three of our client sites hacked, and every one of them were on a specific platform, which I won't name, but it's the one that makes it really easy to add plugins and update plugins. And then the more plugins you have, the more points of potential breach you've got, the more potential you have for interoperability that does not do well, or non-interoperability, if you will. And that zero trust we were talking about, if I don't have to have anybody else in my sandbox, then it's easy for me to trust that it's not going to get dirty. But if I have 27 other people playing in my sandbox, then I have to worry about 27 other people bringing crap in and taking my valuable stuff out. And so one of the things that's important when you're looking for a marketplace platform is find something that's capable, right? Something that's extensible, capable, and customizable, so you can have, as close as possible, a single platform, one place of trust, one place to control access, security, performance, and data. So now we have all that data. Converting that to business intelligence might be a number of different things. One, there could be reporting tools, right? Like Power BI, Tableau. There's a bunch of them out there, right? We can write custom SQL reports on our own platform, right? So for every one of our clients, we're storing the data in a SQL database. They can turn around and go, I would like the data to do this, 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 this. And we can go, sure. And within 2 or 3 hours, we can have a custom chart, workflow, diagram, wizard, report, whatever they want, slicing and dicing that data, right? So the most important thing for you is not whether or not the platform, I mean, I guess the important thing is the platform does capture the data. The two is, do you know what data it's captured? Do you know what data you want to be captured that's important to you to make a business decision? Because if you don't know what you want, it can capture all the data in the world. But if it's got 10,000 data points and you don't know, taking those data points, what it can do, then it's not really helpful data. right? So for example, if I took something on my marketplace and I started tracking logins, I just want to know when everybody logged in. I don't even really care how much time they spent on the site. It might be interesting, though, to know how much time they spent on the site as well. It might be interesting to know, did they buy anything? How many products on average did they browse? I mean, you can start seeing how this data could get really important. But maybe for me, the one problem I want to see is for my sales reps, which of their clients are at risk? Well, how do I define that? Well, I don't really know. I can track them in a number of different ways. One, I could start trying to slice and dice all the sales data, go through trends and see if their purchasing has dropped more than X percent month to month, year to year, whatever. I can start looking at really deep diving into that. And that's certainly one place we could go. Another might even be more simple. Maybe I just want to know all my clients that haven't logged in 60 days. All right. I just want to know that. Really super simple. Well, if I don't track logins, I can't get that data. So one of the important things for you to do is figure out and start writing down what are some of the things that might help you make business decisions, right? Clients at risk is a great one. Okay, well, if I track logins and I determine a client's at risk if they haven't logged in 60 days, that's an easy indicator. Great. That's a lot easier to capture than slicing and dicing all the sales data and trying to look at the trends and send up reports and notifications that one of my users' buying pattern dropped more than 12% year over year. Right. I think that's really important too. And we should monitor that as well, because that's really what starts going to revenue. But as far as customer service and when should my reps pick up the phone and reach out to their clients, they're too busy to know. They don't know. But if I track their logins, that might be something real quick that all of a sudden it pops up and says, hey, Chris hasn't logged in 60 days. You should give him a call and check in on him. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, I pick up the phone and I call Chris and say, hey, Chris, haven't seen you on the site in a while. How you been? What can I do to help you? You know, what's going on in your life these days, and help facilitate that relationship. So, Chris, I'm going to let you tie this off and wrap things up, and then we'll go ahead and say goodbye to our audience today. Anything you want to close out with?
Yeah, I would just say, just around that point with the power, the power of that data, with that business intelligence. One of the key things is like, how are you going to marry that into your current business? And I think your point about like having too much information is something that a lot of organizations have sort of gone down that path. So you do have to choose metrics that you're going to track and sort of marry into your organization and get buy-in that you're going to do something with that data. We will help you as an organization to, sort of think through that and work through that if you want. And we just encourage you to work with a team that has experience that can tell you, this is the key set of information that we track to help scale this platform. And this data is not bad. It's just, this is what we track to do this over here before. And the more that you get that, the better you can sort of like get your organization to buy into. Hey, these guys are the experts. They know that in the past, they tracked these metrics for these other platforms that had this success that we want. If we just do the same thing, we probably will get similar results. And having those kind of discussions within your team, not just sort of the hypothetical, like reporting and, can this software do something? That's one level of depth. I think the next level is getting your team to adopt it and actually implement it and use it to actually deliver better service and cause your company to scale. So that's what we're all about. We're going to continue to help provide this type of information. We certainly appreciate you checking out this video. If you'd like more information, feel free to reach out to us for a complimentary consultation. And until then, thanks for watching and bye for now.
Bye for now.